The moon is our nearest neighbor on the night sky and well observed and studied. Nevertheless, you find lots of mysteries, fairy tales, conspiracy theories, for instance about the dark side of the moon or why NASA never returned to the moon after the first moon landing. Fact is that the moon has quite some influence on planet Earth, based on gravity, like the rise and fall of the tide, to mention one example, or sometimes on people having a less deep sleep when the moon is full and bright. Today's science has given us lots of tools, and photography gives us the means to actually take photos of the moon. In this video I will provide a comprehensive tutorial how to take the perfect moon shot, and I will use the Sony A7R IV for this, but you can do this with every modern DSLM. I will include information and my full workflow on camera settings up to post-processing. Let's get started. Taking photos of the moon can be done in various ways, so I demonstrated that this even is possible with a smartphone like the Huawei P30 Pro. And of course you have to discount the quality you get out of those pictures because the smartphone sensor is very small compared to a professional DSLR and DSLM. And also because the zoom you get is mainly digital, and that of course discounts immediately your quality of the shot. What I was doing the last days when we had these clear moon nights here, I was going to shoot the moon with the Sony A7R IV. So you see it here, that is a professional DSLM and has a full frame sensor, and we have about 60 megapixels on that camera. And of course, in order to zoom the moon, you need quite some optics in front of your camera, so you need special lenses. And what I was using here is a G Master lens. It's the 100 to 400 G Master optically stabilized, and I also used an extender here. So there is an extender here on that lens, which is a 2x magnification in addition to what the 400mm already bring to you. And then I used a little special tweaking on the camera itself to actually get the shot and the magnification in a way I wanted to have it. So let's get started how you set up your camera, and then let's look into the results. Typically on my Sony A7R IV, I use lightweight lenses. So a typical lens I use is the G Master here, 24mm f1.4. It's a terrific lens, terrific optics, super sharp images, and it's not very heavy. If you want to shoot the moon and you mount the 100 to 400mm telezoom lens here, also from the G Master series, with a 2x tele converter, then actually you have quite some heavy equipment in your hand. So this is really heavy because there's a lot of glass in that lens. And nevertheless, I was able to do my moon shots in handhold mode, so I was not using a tripod. It's not necessary to use a tripod, and the reason is that the way you photograph the moon is completely different to the way you photograph the night sky and the stars. And I'm going to explain this in a moment by means of the camera menu settings and how I set the camera up. But there is a big difference, of course, because the moon itself is very bright and you don't need to take long exposures. You take actually quite short shutter speed in order to get the moon crisp and sharp, and that's why you can do it handhold. In particular, since this G Master lens here has optical image stabilization and you have the in-body stabilization from the Sony A7R IV based on that stabilized sensor. So you can do this handhold easily and there's no need to work with a tripod. So let's have a look how to set up the camera for a nice crisp moon shot. The first thing I typically do is I go to the metering mode. I have this set up for my function menu here, but you can also go via the normal menu button here and find just your metering entry. But let's go via the function menu here because that's quicker, and then you go here to your metering mode and then make sure it's not on multi, not on center, but on spot metering. And you can also have here different sizes of metering. You can have standard and large. Keep it at standard because you want to measure exactly where the moon is, and you don't want to take into account for light metering the dark or night sky surroundings of the moon. So spot metering is what you need to choose here. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure your ISO is in the right setting. And what I typically use is an ISO of 100 or an ISO of 200, but 100 will do just fine. I think the best result I achieved with an ISO of 100. I did not use the lower ISO settings here. 100 was just doing fine. And many cameras, if you do this with a different camera than the Sony, they can't even go down to 80, 64 or 50 ISO. So as a rule of thumb, ISO of 100 is just doing fine. The next thing you want to set up is your autofocus. And a moonshot works fine with autofocus. In night photography, typically when I'm taking photos of the night sky and have some foreground, let's say a lake or mountains in the background or whatever, I use manual focus. But for the moon, and in particular if you do it hand hold, then it is convenient to use the autofocus and it works just fine. And the way you need to set this up is go again into the function menu, go to focus area and make sure you do not have here one of the other options, but you have flexible spot. And I also put it on small, not on medium, not on large, but on small, so that I exactly have the focus where the moon is. The next thing on focusing, which you want to make sure is, first of all, in the drive mode, be on single shooting. There is no need to be in burst mode here or continuous shooting, just keep it at single shooting. And then the second point here is make sure you're on autofocus single. Don't have the automatic, don't have continuous, you don't want your autofocus going forth and back all the time. Just stay at autofocus single for a single shot. And then if you really want to squeeze out the most information of your moonshot, it is good to store the image in JPEG and in RAW. And the way you set this up is you go to the menu button here, you have the file format here and then choose RAW and JPEG to make sure you have both files on your cards. Choose it, go on the RAW file to uncompressed, do not choose compressed if you can afford to have the storage capacity it needs. And on the JPEG quality for the best result, I always have this at extra fine to make sure I get what I want. Now here is something which I need to cover separately. And you see this is on large 26 megapixel and not on the 61 I had before. And the reason is that I used the crop mode here. So here's a menu entry just on the first page in the first menu, which says APS-C Super 35 millimeters. And I put this on. And I'm going to explain in a second what that means. But basically in a nutshell, it crops your sensor to an APS-C format. And that means you immediately gain a magnification factor on top of what the optics here is bringing to you of 1.5. And I'm going to do a little educational section in a moment, as well as calculating together the maximum magnification I can achieve in this way. So let's have a quick look on how this works with the APS-C crop in the camera. I showed it in the menu item already. You see here the Sony A7R IV, and you see in the middle that big sensor here. So that's a full frame sensor. And if you look at that, the dimensions of that sensor are 35.7 millimeters times 23.8 millimeters. Now, if we would have an APS-C sensor, then that sensor size would be significantly smaller. So on the Sony world, we typically have APS-C, like on the Sony Alpha 6400, 23.5 millimeters times 15.6 millimeters. And you see here, if in the camera menu, you now choose that APS-C crop menu entry and switch it to on, then the camera is using only that part, so the middle rectangle of the sensor. And that gives us a crop factor of 1.5, which is a magnification at the sacrifice, of course, of only having 26 megapixels instead of 60 to 61 megapixels on the full frame sensor. And the way we do the calculation now is as follows. So first of all, we have the Sony G Master 100 to 400 millimeter and we shoot it at 400 millimeters. Then we have a 2x Tele converter, and this all in gives us an optical zoom of 800 millimeters. Then we use the menu setting for APS-C crop, and we gain another factor of 1.5 magnification, which leads us to 800 millimeters times 1.5, which is 1200 millimeters, but then only with 26 megapixels. And actually, if you look at the metadata of the moonshot I took, then you see this materializing here. So first of all, you see the optical including crop focal length of 1200 millimeters here. That is what we had here. You also see here my f-stop number, which was an aperture of f16. You see my photographic sensitivity, which is the ISO of 100, and all the other data you have in here. So the last setting which I need to deliver now on the video is how to set up the shutter speed. And first of all, I recommend on the mode wheel here to be in M for manual. And then you can set up here with this wheel, for instance, the aperture here. You can start with an aperture of 11. That is, I think, close enough. I actually achieved the best results with an aperture of f16. And on the shutter speed, as you saw before, the ISO was set at 100. On the shutter speed, I recommend 1/200 seconds, because that is quick enough to allow you a handhold shot and also will bring just the right amount of light when you light meter the moon. So that is what my recommendation is. And you see here is completely different to when you photograph the night sky and want to take shots of the Milky Way or other nighttime photography. You typically go to long exposure times, whereas here you have short exposure time, which means high shutter speed. And that is basically all on the settings. So I think it's time to come to the next section here. If we really want to take this to the extreme now, we could also use the clear zoom, which is built in most Sony cameras, or at least into the Sony DSLMs I know. And clear zoom is a special technique from Sony. I'm going to explain now what it is, and then we go back to the camera menu. So what is clear image zoom? And I'm here on the Sony homepage, and there is actually quite some information about what is a digital zoom, what is a clear image zoom, and what is a smart zoom. And the clear image zoom is here in that section. And if we click on that, then it says clear image zoom is a function that uses proprietary technology by Sony, which is called the pixel super resolution technology. It allows you to enlarge the image with close to original image quality when shooting still images. So in other words, it's providing probably a mixture on scaling up the image in a way that you get up to a 2x magnification without losing too much of image quality, almost in the same way like simulating an optical zoom. And that is something you can enable in the menu. I'm going to show right now how this is working, but there is a sacrifice you have to make, and I'll mention that in the next section of the video. So let's have a look how we can set up clear zoom. And the way you do this is you go into the menu, and in the menu you have just here on the second camera menu on the 6th page, you have a page coming to zoom, zoom settings, and zoom ring rotate. And this is grayed out now. And the reason why this is grayed out is because consciously I decided to have JPEG and RAW in my image files. And I need to switch this off in order to activate the clear zoom, because clear zoom is only working for JPEG images, because it is using that technique I just described from the Sony homepage, and that doesn't work in RAW. So the way I have to set this up is I go here to the first camera menu, and then I go down, then I go away from RAW and JPEG, I go to JPEG only. And then I go up again, go to the second camera menu again, go down, go to the 6th page. And now zoom is no longer grayed out. So I can activate it here. I could already choose it. You see here some magnification scale. So I don't have the lens hood removed yet, so you don't see it in the image. Then I go back, and then you can here under zoom settings, you can choose what you have. Optical zoom only, clear image zoom, which is that technique I just described. Via the Sony homepage, and you can have digital zoom, and on the digital zoom you can go even further, but your quality will suffer. So I recommend, if you really want to boost your magnification and you're okay having no RAW files but only JPEG files, then clear image zoom is the option you should go for. So this is the first example of an image coming right out of the camera. So this is an 800 zoom, 400mm G master lens, 2x teleconverter. OOC means out of the camera. It's a JPEG. Let's briefly look at the metadata here. I make this a little bigger so we can see what's going on here. All right. So first of all, you see here, that's the lens we have, 100 to 400, 2x teleconverter. This is already converted here in the lens model to 200 to 800, which is the boost up by 2x magnification. It's 1/200 seconds exposure time. It's at this point at an f-stop of 11. So the aperture is a little less close than what I mentioned before of f16 for my final shot. And the focal length then is 800mm, of course. ISO is 100. So this is exactly how the image comes out of the camera, and it already looks quite nice, but there is a fair amount of post-processing you need to make the moon really pop. And if you zoom in here, let's just look at that. It is a lot of detail you can see in that picture, but it is still a little bit, I don't know how to say that, hazy, fuzzy, and it's probably from the air around the moon. And I show later in my final shot, which is, I think, the perfect moon shot, how to get this really, really much better in Lightroom. So this is now the next image. Again, it's an out of the camera image, a JPEG. It's now at 1200 millimeters. You see the size of the moon, I have not applied any zoom in here yet, is bigger than what you saw before. And this is now the 400 millimeter 2x Tele converter and the APS-C crop, which reduces the resolution to 26 megapixels, but brings me by an APS-C crop factor of 1.5 closer to the moon. Let's briefly look at the metadata to confirm what we have here. So here is the G master lens. Here's the 2x Tele converter, but in contrast to what we had before, we have no longer 800 millimeter but 1200 because we applied in the menu settings of the A7R IV the crop down to APS-C and to that middle triangle I showed before in my little demonstration of what a crop factor really means for the Sony A7 series cameras. So that looks good. Again, I think we have a lot of details in the picture. If I zoom in a little bit, a lot of information, but it needs the post-processing with Lightroom or Photoshop to actually make the moon pop. And in the next picture, which I'm showing out of the camera first, I quickly show the workflow in Lightroom how to actually make that moon a quite perfect moon shot. So this is the last out of the camera shot I'm going to show before we go quickly into post-processing to make the moon much better than you see it here. First of all, let's explain what the magnification here is. So we have, let's go maybe into the metadata to see this. First of all, we have 400 millimeter on the lens. Then we have 2x Tele converter, which brings us up to 800 millimeters. Then we applied the APS-C crop setting in the menu of the Sony camera, which brings us up to 1200 millimeters. And then we applied here the clear image zoom, which I showed before how to activate it in the menu of the Sony, which is another factor of 2. So all in, we end up at an insane focal length of 2400 millimeters. And this is really a telescope-like setup here. And you see it on the moon. The moon is filling basically the whole sensor here, the whole frame. And we have a lot of detail in it. You could argue that you could also do just the optical zoom and then do a crop. But my experience is that that algorithm, which is called clear image zoom from Sony, is so good that I was never able to reproduce the same clarity and fine details in a simple crop than if I would use just instead of it the clear image zoom as it comes in camera processing. So that's why I recommend to do it in the way and in the workflow I was describing in that video. So now let's go into post-processing and see what we can do to make this moon even better. So you see here the original shot as out of the camera on the left-hand side and the post-processed image on the right-hand side. And you clearly see that this one is popping. It's very crisp, it's sharp. You see a lot of details in the craters here, which are all kind of swallowed away in the shadows here. And the way I set this up is I want to quickly go through the settings here in Lightroom. So this is Lightroom Classic. And the way I set this up is, first of all, I converted the image into black and white because there is not much to see besides gray shades and black and white on the moon. So we can save some information for black and white. And by the way, the black and white conversion on Lightroom works very, very well. I gave it a little bit more of exposure here. You see I went up to 0.8 because the image as it came out of the camera was quite dark. I also boosted up the whites and the shadows a little bit. The highlights I took down, typically also in the sky. You should never overdo it. On the moon it was okay to go down to -100, but on the sky typically a -30, -40 will give you better structure if the highlights are not blown out. And then on texture, and that's an important one for the moon, it really boosts up the contours you have on the moon here. So I gave it quite some high amount here of 70. As I said, this is not the usual setup I use in Lightroom. The moon is a special object, a special type of photography, so you can afford here to go up to +70. Then also on the regional section here, I boosted up the lights a little bit. The rest I left untouched. I did nothing on the color here because this is in black and white anyway, and I didn't want to tweak around with the color channels here. and then a little bit of sharpening, not too much. Sharpening too aggressively used is always destroying an image. So I never recommend to go up a lot on sharpening. And then on the luminance, which is the noise reduction, I went up to 19 or 20 here maybe, to give it, you know, a smooth value. And that's basically it. That's what I did to post-process this image here. And clearly, if you look at the details here, the right-hand side is much, much better. So I hope you liked my little video and that tutorial. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up. If you like my channel and the content I'm producing here, please subscribe. Thanks for watching and peace out.